I used to think the worst thing a fiancé could do is betray your trust in a crowded room, or leave you standing alone at an altar. I was wrong. The worst thing he can do is lock you in the dark while he burns your world to the ground with someone else. The air inside the concrete archival vault was thick with the scent of unwashed silk, dry cotton, and the sharp chemical tang of fresh fabric dyes. For 18 months, this windowless sanctuary in the industrial gut of Queens had been my entire world. It was a tomb of my own making, lined with floor-to-ceiling iron racks holding the lifeblood of the Albright fashion empire's upcoming autumn luxury collection. My fingers were mapped with tiny, jagged white scars, the permanent receipts of thousands of frantic late-night needle pricks. My spine carried a dull, radiating ache from slouching over the massive mahogany cutting tables until the early hours of the morning, while the rest of Manhattan slept. I had given up my name, my health, and my identity to build this collection. It was supposed to be my grand debut to the fashion elite at the Plaza Hotel. It was supposed to be the moment the world finally looked past the billionaire Albright name and saw the true genius behind the curtain. Instead, it was the night of my execution. I stood at the central mannequin, smoothing down the asymmetrical hemline of an immaculate ivory silk evening gown, my masterpiece. The fabric felt like water beneath my calloused fingertips. I was so consumed by the line of the drape that I didn't initially hear the heavy 5-inch thick steel door groan on its massive iron hinges. "Dominic?" I murmured without turning around, assuming it was my fiancé coming to drag me away from the studio for an hour of forced sleep. "I just need 20 more minutes with the shoulder alignment. The lighting on the plaza runway is going to be brutal, and if the silk doesn't catch the flashbulbs perfectly—" "The flashbulbs won't be looking at your stitches tomorrow, Maren." The voice didn't carry the warm, expensive baritone I had fallen in love with over the last 3 years. The loving fiancé mask was gone, replaced by a flat corporate cadence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I turned around slowly, dropping my box of silver pins. They scattered across the polished concrete floor with the sound like falling needles. Dominic Albright stood in the vault's entryway, looking devastatingly handsome in a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. But he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on his smartphone, his thumb casually scrolling through a legal document. And standing directly behind him, her fingers intertwined with his in a sickeningly familiar grip, was Sasha. Sasha, my personal assistant, the girl I had plucked from a predatory low-wage sewing house in Brooklyn, the girl I had mentored, fed, and welcomed into my private apartment when she had nothing but a portfolio of unrefined sketches. Tonight, she wasn't wearing her usual oversized assistant's apron. She was dressed in a stunning, form-fitting emerald satin slip dress, a dress I recognized instantly because I had designed it myself. Her lips, painted a dark, venomous crimson, were wet. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun for work, fell over her shoulders in loose, post-coital waves. As I watched, Dominic casually slid his hand down from her fingers, his palms settling over the curve of her hip with a practiced, intimate possessiveness that knocked the air straight out of my lungs. "Dominic!" My voice was a cracked whisper, the betrayal hitting me with the physical force of a car crash. "Dominic, what is this? Sasha, why are you holding him like that?" Sasha didn't look guilty. A slow, triumphant, deeply malicious smile spread across her face, her eyes flashing with the predatory satisfaction she had hidden behind a mask of submissive innocence for months. She leaned her head back against Dominic's shoulder, looking at me like a queen looking down at a servant. "Oh, Maren," Sasha purred, her voice dripping with mock pity. "You really are blind, aren't you? You thought he spent all those late nights in the Midtown office looking over corporate spreadsheets? He was with me, in his office, on the leather sofa. While you were over here playing with your little needles and pins, Dominic was tasting what a real woman feels like." "Shut up," I choked out, my heart fracturing in my chest. I looked at Dominic, my eyes pleading for him to tell me it was a sick joke, a prank, a nightmare. "Dominic, tell her to leave. Tell me she's lying." Dominic finally looked up from his phone, his cold, aristocratic eyes devoid of a single ounce of remorse or humanity. He didn't even deny it. In fact, he tightened his grip on Sasha's hip, pulling her flush against his side. "She isn't lying, Maren," Dominic said smoothly, his voice flat and unbothered. "Sasha provides a utility that you simply couldn't manage. You became boring, obsessed with your patterns, always smelling of industrial starch and graphite. But more importantly, Sasha understands how the corporate system actually works. She knows how to cooperate." "Cooperate," I repeated, my vision tunneling as the room began to tilt. Sasha tapped the screen of her digital tablet, her long, manicured nails clicking against the glass. "The legal transfer just cleared the global patent registry, Maren. Your electronic signatures have been completely scrubbed from every design patent for the autumn line. The copyright filings for the asymmetrical charcoal blazer, the silk evening gowns, and the structured coats, they are now legally registered under my name. Tomorrow morning, the world will meet me as the new, undiscovered creative genius of the Albright dynasty." "You're thieves!" A white-hot wave of pure, primal fury exploded through my veins, temporarily burning through the heartbreak. I lunged forward across the mahogany table, my hands clawing through the air to rip my leather portfolio out of Sasha's hands. "Those are my patterns! My blood is on those sleeves! You can't steal my life!" Before my fingers could even graze her dress, Dominic shot forward. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed my right wrist with a crushing, bruising force, twisting my arm violently behind my back, and with a brutal shove, he slammed my body face first against the heavy metal edge of the cutting table. A sharp, agonizing pain exploded through my collarbone and hip as I bounced off the steel and crashed heavily onto the concrete floor. I groaned, struggling to draw air into my collapsed lungs, the taste of copper filling my mouth. From the floor, through a haze of tears and pain, I watched them. Dominic pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket, casually wiping his fingers as if he had just touched something contaminated. He reached out, wrapped his arm around Sasha's waist, and pulled her into a deep, passionate, lingering kiss right in front of me. Sasha moaned softly, her fingers running through his hair, her eyes opening slightly just to look down at me on the floor and smirk. "Let's go, darling," Dominic murmured against her lips, his voice laced with an intimate warmth he had never given me. "The car is waiting. We have a pre-show celebration to finish." "Dominic, no!" I scrambled to my knees, ignoring the sharp, screaming pain in my shoulder, and dragged myself toward the exit. But I was too late. The massive steel vault door began to swing shut. Through the closing gap, I saw Dominic reach into his tuxedo pocket and pull out a gold-plated DuPont lighter. With a casual flick of his thumb, a bright yellow flame danced to life in the dark corridor. By midnight, this old archive will suffer a tragic, catastrophic electrical fire. There are decades of dry, untreated fabrics stored in the basement directly below you. Do you know how fast silk burns, Maren? There won't be anything left of your paper drafts, your handwriting, or your body. "Dominic, please!" I screamed, throwing the entire weight of my broken body against the cold steel of the closed door. I slammed my open palms against the thick, reinforced glass viewing window until the skin split, leaving smears of crimson on the glass. "Take the collection, take the credit, take the company. Just don't leave me here to die." Through the glass, I watched them turn away. Dominic draped his tuxedo jacket over Sasha's bare shoulders, his arm resting low on her back as they walked away into the shadows of the outer corridor, laughing together. They didn't look back, not once. Within 3 minutes, the sharp hum of the overhead fluorescent lights faltered and died, plunging the vault into pitch-black darkness. Then came the smoke. It wasn't a slow crawl. It was a thick, acrid, suffocating wall of black chemical smoke pouring through the overhead ventilation shafts as the synthetic dyes and ancient cotton caught fire in the basement below. I began to cough violently, a harsh, tearing sound that scratched the back of my throat until blood mixed with my saliva. The floor beneath my feet grew scorching hot, the heat radiating through the soles of my shoes. Through the narrow gap at the bottom of the steel door, a flickering orange light began to dance. The fire had climbed the stairs. The temperature inside the concrete room rose to an oven-like blistering heat. Behind me, I heard the whispering, tragic sound of my masterpiece ivory silk gown catching fire, the delicate fabric shriveling and melting into black, smoking teardrops of plastic. I collapsed to my knees, my head spinning from the lack of oxygen. I clawed at the base of the steel door, my fingernails tearing and lifting from the skin as I scraped against the rough metal, leaving bloody tracks on the gray paint. I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were filled with boiling oil. Through a high, narrow, barred window near the ceiling, I could see the distant, sparkling lights of the Manhattan skyline. Tomorrow, the city would celebrate luxury. Tomorrow, Dominic and Sasha would sleep in the same bed, waking up to stand on the red carpet, smiling for the cameras, wearing my soul like a coat, while my body was reduced to ash. "No," I choked out, my forehead resting against the blistering hot metal of the vault door. My voice was nothing more than a dying, raspy gasp. "Not like this. I gave you everything, and you burn me in the dark while you hold her?" The air turned into pure, white-hot fire. The toxic smoke filled my chest, cutting off the last of my consciousness. My grip loosened. As my eyes closed for what I believed was the final time, a single venomous, diamond-hard vow burned into the center of my dying mind. If I ever wake up, if I ever crawl out of this hell, I will unpick your lives until there is nothing left but ash. The room exploded into a blinding flash of white heat, and then absolute, deafening silence. Gasps. My eyes flew open. I bolted upright in my seat, my spine snapping completely straight as my lungs violently expanded, drawing in a massive, ragged, desperate breath of air. My hands flew directly to my throat, my fingers clawing at my collar as I braced myself for the searing heat of the fire and the choking weight of the black smoke. But the air that filled my chest wasn't smoke. It was cool, clean. It tasted distinctly of steam irons, expensive lavender fabric starch, and high-end French perfume. I wasn't lying on the burning floor of a concrete vault in Queens. I was sitting in an ergonomic, premium black leather chair behind a massive, pristine white minimalist desk. the bright golden afternoon sun was pouring through massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows, illuminating the polished herringbone hardwood floors of my private design suite at the Albright flagship store on Fifth Avenue. I stared down at my hands, my chest heaving as if I had just run a marathon. My hands were pale, perfectly clean, and completely unburned. There was no soot, no blood beneath the nails, and no torn skin. Instead, my fingers were wrapped firmly around a heavy, expensive graphite drafting pencil, which was hovering precisely over a large, clean sheet of heavyweight design paper. "Maren, are you feeling all right? You've been staring at that sleeve sketch for 20 minutes without moving. Do you have a migraine?" My head snapped up so fast, a sharp pain shot down my neck. Standing on the opposite side of the minimalist desk, holding a heavy silver tray containing a crystal glass of sparkling water with a slice of lemon, was Sasha. She looked exactly like she used to before her absolute greed had corrupted her soul. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat professional bun. Her face was a mask of perfect, quiet, submissive innocence. There was no malice in her eyes, no hidden triumph, no corporate coldness. Just the watchful, slightly anxious gaze of a junior assistant waiting for her superior to give her direction. But looking closer, now that the scales had been stripped from my eyes, I saw the subtle clues I had missed in my past life. She was wearing a silk blouse that was unbuttoned just one turn too low for a corporate office. Around her neck was a delicate, expensive diamond pendant, a piece of jewelry that an assistant on her salary could never afford. I recognized the setting. It was from Harry Winston, the private family jeweler Dominic used. My heart hammered against my ribs like a frantic, trapped bird. I clamped my jaw shut so tightly my teeth ached, forcing myself to hold back the primal scream of terror and rage that was rising in my throat. I forced my eyes away from her face and looked down at the massive sheet of paper on my desk. Drawn there in precise, technically flawless lines was the initial blueprint for an asymmetrical crepe blazer, the exact iconic design that had launched the Albright Cruise collection. It was a collection that had debuted exactly 2 years before the night of the fire. 2 years, my mind screamed as the realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The fire didn't kill me. It threw me backward through time. I am sitting in my office 2 years before the betrayal. They haven't stolen the patents yet. Dominic hasn't locked the vault door. I have 2 years of future knowledge. A cold, diamond-sharp calm began to settle over my panic. The universe hadn't just saved me. It had handed me a weapon. "Maren," Sasha took a cautious step forward, the silver tray clinking slightly in her hands as her brow furrowed with mild concern. "Do you need me to reschedule the fabric review with Eleanor? She's currently down in the main VIP showroom with the luxury buyers from Neiman Marcus. She explicitly said she expects the finished prototypes on her desk by 4 o'clock sharp." I slowly lowered the graphite pencil, placing it perfectly parallel to the edge of the paper. I took a deep, deliberate, grounding breath, forcing the survival instincts of a dying woman to completely override the residual shock of the time jump. If I showed even a flicker of weakness or erratic behavior now, I would lose the only advantage I had. "No," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady, but it carried a new, icy, authoritative weight that caused Sasha to blink in sudden surprise. "Do not reschedule anything, Sasha. In fact, I need you to drop the showroom preparation and execute a private task for me immediately." "Of course," she said, setting the silver tray down on the corner of the desk and pulling out her sleek digital tablet, her stylus hovering over the screen. "Name it." "I want you to call the Customs Logistics Office at JFK Airport. the incoming shipment of premium Italian silk and satin from the Como Mills, the shipment that is currently marked for our autumn production run. Tell the customs director to flag the container for an extended manual government quality and safety inspection." Sasha paused, her stylus freezing an inch above the glass screen. She looked up, her expression a mix of confusion and mild alarm. "An inspection, Maren? That fabric is scheduled to be released and delivered to our Midtown cutting house tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. If we initiate a manual government hold, that container will be locked in a federal warehouse for at least 10 to 12 days. Eleanor will be absolutely furious. The entire production line for the seasonal launch will stall." I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing one leg over the other, a slow, dark, mocking smile touching the corners of my lips. I remembered this exact week perfectly from my past life. Tomorrow morning, at exactly 5:30 a.m., a massive, ancient water main would burst directly beneath the street outside the Albright Midtown cutting facility. The resulting flash flood would completely fill the basement storage units with 3 feet of filthy, ruinous sewage water. In my past life, that premium Italian silk had been delivered right on time, sitting on the low wooden floorboards, completely destroyed within hours of arrival. That single disaster had forced the company into a $3 million deficit, forcing me to rewrite my designs using cheap, stiff synthetic nylons, the very synthetics that Dominic would later use to entrap me. But in this life, the silk would be perfectly dry, safe inside a secure, climate-controlled government facility at JFK. "Do exactly as I said, Sasha," I said softly, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that left absolutely no room for negotiation or argument. "Have the customs office hold the shipment for an audit. And Sasha—" "Yes, Maren?" "File the hold paperwork under my personal independent design account using my private designer identification code. Do not log it under the Albright corporate ledger. I want the legal control of that specific fabric shipment to rest under my name alone." Sasha hesitated. I saw it, the briefest microscopic flicker of her natural, calculating ambition crossing her features. It was the primitive instinct to run straight to Dominic to report that the lead designer was making independent legal moves behind his back. But right now, in this timeline, she was still just an insecure assistant, completely untrained in the high-level corporate warfare she would later wage against me. She bowed her head, her stylus rapidly tapping the screen. "Understood, Maren. I will file the paperwork through your private portal immediately." The moment the heavy double doors of my design suite clicked shut behind her, I stood up. My legs were trembling slightly from the sheer adrenaline coursing through my veins, but my intellect was crystal clear. I walked over to the full-length gold-framed mirror in the corner of the massive room. I stared at my reflection. I looked younger. The dark, hollow circles of total physical exhaustion that had ruined my cheeks during the final months of my past life were gone. My eyes were bright, clear, and filled with a cold, predatory intelligence. 2 years, Dominic, I whispered to the empty room, my fingers curling into a fist so tight my knuckles cracked. 2 years to strip you of every single cent, every single title, and every single shred of dignity you think you own. Without a knock, the heavy double doors of my suite burst open. Dominic Albright walked into the room, practically radiating the effortless, obnoxious confidence of a billionaire prince who believed the earth rotated solely for his amusement. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal three-piece suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, a confident, dazzling smile on his lips. He threw a fresh copy of a major international fashion newspaper onto my white desk and walked directly over to my private espresso machine in the corner, completely ignoring my presence as he pressed the button. "Maren, darling," he said, his back turned to me as the machine began to hiss and grind. "My mother just finalized the exclusive guest list for the charity preview tonight at the Plaza Hotel. The editor-in-chief of Vogue is confirmed to be sitting at the head VIP table. This is our massive moment. The asymmetrical crepe blazer you're currently drafting, we need to officially announce it tonight as a joint creative collaboration." I stood perfectly still by the mirror, watching him. I watched the casual, careless way his hands moved, the arrogant way he carried his shoulders. In my past life, I had mistaken that arrogance for leadership. I had loved him for it. Tonight, watching him, it made my skin crawl with an intense, visceral disgust. As he waited for the espresso to pour, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his face softening into a private, satisfied smile as he typed a rapid response. My eyes narrowed. From my position by the mirror, I could see the reflection of his screen in the espresso machine paneling. The contact name was labeled as a generic corporate supplier, but the message text was unmistakably intimate. "Can't wait for tonight after the runway. Wear the emerald silk." The very dress she had been wearing when they locked me in the vault. They were already sleeping together. The affair was already alive, rotting the foundation of my life while I stood 3 feet away. "A joint collaboration, Dominic?" I asked, walking slowly toward the desk, keeping my hands clasped tightly behind my back to hide my shaking fists. "That's interesting, considering you haven't touched a piece of drafting paper in your entire life. You don't even know how to adjust the tension on a standard brother sewing machine." Dominic laughed, a rich, patronizing sound, as he grabbed his crystal espresso cup. He turned around and walked over to me, reaching out his left hand to casually cup my chin, his thumb pressing against my jawline with a casual possessiveness. "Darling, the luxury market doesn't care about the tedious technical details," he said, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "You do the stitching and I do the high-level strategy, the branding, and the financing. It's a perfect partnership. My family's name on the front door of this building is the only reason your designs are taken seriously in Paris. Without the Albright legacy, your beautiful garments are just rolls of fabric sitting in a basement. Let's not forget how the corporate system works, okay?" I didn't pull away from his hand. I let his fingers rest against my skin, deliberately memorizing the exact temperature of his touch, the exact cadence of his condescension, storing it all away as fuel for the fire I was about to ignite. "Of course, Dominic," I said, forcing a smooth, compliant smile to touch my lips. "The partnership. I would absolutely hate to do anything that might disrupt the perfect family legacy." "That's my smart girl," he murmured, leaning down to press a quick, cold, dry kiss against my cheek. "Be ready by 7 o'clock sharp tonight. Wear the cream silk evening gown I bought for you last month. It makes you look beautifully compliant. We need to look like the perfect power couple for the photographers." He turned on his heel and strode out of the office, his mind already moving to his next high-level board meeting, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman he had just left alone in the room was no longer his submissive, love-blind fiancée. I was a ghost that had crawled out of his future, and I was about to turn his pristine runway into a slaughterhouse. The heavy double doors of my design suite had barely clicked shut behind Dominic when I walked over to the long, velvet-lined wardrobe in the corner of the room. Hanging inside, shrouded in protective garment plastic, was the cream silk evening gown Dominic had ordered me to wear. I unzipped the bag. The fabric was beautiful, fluid, and entirely pathetic. It was high-necked, draped in long, heavy folds that would cover my collarbones and restrict my stride. A perfect sartorial cage. It was designed to make me look exactly like what Dominic wanted the press to see. A quiet, beautifully compliant background extension of his family's grand shadow. Compliant, I whispered, the word tasting like ash on my tongue. Not in this lifetime. I reached past the cream silk, shoving it deep into the dark corners of the closet. My hand bypassed the delicate, submissive pastels of my old wardrobe and gripped the heavy zipper of a hidden garment bag at the very back. I had spent the last 48 hours secretly reconstructing a prototype I had originally intended for the Paris finale. I stripped away the plastic wrapper, letting the masterpiece catch the harsh afternoon sunlight pouring through the glass windows. It was a high-collar column dress carved from an unyielding heavy crepe in a shade of visceral, uncompromising crimson. The neckline didn't plunge. It rose up like a sharp armor plate against my jawline, emphasizing the cold, predatory angle of my chin. A single dramatic cape flowed down from the left shoulder, sharp-edged and mathematical, while a daring, razor-cut slit slashed up the right side of the skirt, ensuring I could walk with long, powerful, unhindered strides. It didn't look like a gown. It looked like a declaration of war. When I stepped into the grand ballroom lobby of the Plaza Hotel at exactly 6:45, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Dominic was standing near the towering floral arrangements, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne, laughing effortlessly with a senior writer from Vogue. He looked pristine, untouchable, and suffocatingly arrogant. Then his eyes shifted across the marble floor, and his laugh died instantly in his throat. I walked directly toward him, the heavy crimson cape draping behind me like a freshly spilled bloodstain across the polished white marble. The slit in the skirt flashed with every step, revealing the sharp, lethal line of my Christian Louboutin heels. Dominic's handsome face underwent a rapid, violent transformation. His aristocratic jaw tightened, his brow furrowing into a mask of pure, bewildered irritation as his eyes raked down the scarlet fabric, searching in vain for the submissive cream silk he had commanded me to wear. "Maren," Dominic hissed under his breath, swiftly stepping away from the reporter and grabbing me by the elbow. His fingers clamped down hard, trying to steer me into the shadowed alcove near the coat check. His breath smelled of expensive espresso and gin. "What the hell are you wearing? I explicitly told you to wear the cream gown tonight. You look completely aggressive. Red isn't the Albright brand aesthetic for this launch. You look like you're trying to outshine my mother." I didn't pull my arm out of his grip. I simply tilted my head up, my eyes locking onto his with a cold, unblinking intensity that made his fingers instinctively loosen against my skin. The cream silk was far too fragile for tonight, Dominic. It didn't match the reality of the collection. I decided it was time the world saw exactly what kind of blood actually holds the Albright house together. Dominic stared at me, his chest rising and falling, a sudden unfamiliar flicker of genuine unease crossing his eyes. He didn't understand this version of me. He was used to a woman who apologized for taking up space. He didn't know how to handle a woman who looked like she was about to unpick his throat. Before he could find his voice to reprimand me, Sasha stepped out from the main ballroom entrance. She was wearing her form-fitting emerald satin slip dress, the one I had personally crafted, the one she thought made her look like a queen. But the moment she took in my crimson silhouette, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her lips parted in a silent gasp. Next to the devastating majesty of my gown, her emerald silk suddenly looked cheap, small, and utterly eclipsed. The smug, quiet satisfaction she usually carried backstage completely vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp spike of raw jealousy that flashed across her features. She looked down at her own reflection in the lobby mirrors, then back at my towering scarlet authority, her knuckles turning white around her digital tablet. "Dominic," Eleanor Albright's voice cut through the tension from behind us, her silver walking cane snapping against the floorboards. She approached slowly, her cold eyes analyzing my dress with a profound, terrifying calculation. She paused, her gaze lingering on the flawless, geometric shoulder drape of my cape. "The crimson is bold, Maren, unforgiving. It shows teeth." "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, giving her a small, respectful nod. I intended for it too. Eleanor turned her gaze back to her son, completely ignoring the silent, boiling fury radiating from his posture. "The photographers are lining up at the media wall, Dominic. Take your fiancé inside. The show is about to begin." Dominic swallowed his rage, forcing his dazzling, fake corporate smile back onto his face as the flashbulbs began to go off in the distance. He offered me his arm, his muscles tight with tension. "We will discuss this unannounced wardrobe change the minute the curtains close, Maren." "I look forward to it, darling," I murmured, lightly resting my gloved hand on his sleeve as we walked together into the blinding white light of the grand ballroom. Every camera lens in the room pivoted toward us, the paparazzi screaming our names as the heavy bass of the electronic soundtrack began to thud through the walls. I smiled beautifully for the lenses, my mind perfectly calm as I calculated the exact minutes remaining until the countdown reached 0. The stage was set, the audience was waiting, and as I excused myself to step into the chaotic darkness behind the backstage curtains, leaving Dominic to preen for the reporters alone, the slaughterhouse was finally open. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was an absolute sensory overload of wealth, vanity, and high society perfume. Beneath the vaulted ceilings, massive crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant fracturing light over towering arrangements of rare white orchids. The air was thick with the scent of vintage champagne, expensive leather, and the heavy metallic buzz of a crowded room. Every single prominent fashion critic, European luxury distributor, and multi-million follower influencer in North America was packed into the tiered seating rows. Their eyes were fixed on the pristine white runway that cut through the center of the room. Backstage, the atmosphere was a stark contrast of pure, unadulterated chaos and high-intensity drama. Models were screaming as hairstylists accidentally burned their scalps with hot irons. Dressers were sprinting down narrow corridors, frantically looking for misplaced archival heels, and production assistants were hyperventilating into paper bags. I stood perfectly calm in the center of the preparation area, my hands steady and precise as I personally organized the final clothing racks for the show. Through the thick, heavy velvet curtains that separated the backstage from the main ballroom, I could hear Dominic's booming, deeply charismatic voice echoing through the house microphone. He was out on the main floor, effortlessly charming the press, explaining the deep artistic inspiration behind my asymmetrical blazer design. It's an exploration of modern architectural power and female autonomy, Dominic was telling a huddle of high-profile reporters, his arm casually wrapped around the shoulders of his mother, Eleanor Albright, who sat like a cold, silver-haired dictator at the center VIP table. Maren and I spent months locked in the design studio perfecting this geometric balance. We wanted to create a true, unified, collaborative statement from the Albright dynasty. Backstage, I walked over to the lead model, a striking 6-foot-tall international influencer named Kiki. She possessed over 10 million highly active followers online and held the absolute power to make or break a brand with a single post. Dominic had personally handpicked her to close the show, knowing that her endorsement would guarantee a sellout launch. She was currently wearing the final, completed prototype of my asymmetrical blazer, a stunning, sharp-angled piece of tailored charcoal wool that hugged her frame perfectly. Maren, honestly, this jacket is an absolute masterpiece, Kiki said, turning her body in front of the full-length vanity mirror, admiring the clean, mathematical lines of the silhouette. Dominic told the European buyers this morning that this design was his personal conceptual breakthrough. The man is an absolute creative genius. He certainly thinks he is, I murmured, my voice smooth and unreadable. I knelt beside her, pretending to do a final meticulous check on the alignment of the blazer's lower hem. My right hand slipped quietly into the deep pocket of my designer apron, my fingers wrapping around the cold, specialized metal of a sharp seam ripper I had brought from my desk. I knew the anatomy of this specific blazer better than I knew my own heartbeat. Because of the radical asymmetrical weight of the heavy charcoal wool drape, the entire balance and fit of the garment relied entirely on a single hidden anchoring stitch located deep inside the left armpit seam. It was a hidden tension point that distributed the weight of the jacket perfectly across the model's opposite shoulder. In my past life, I had reinforced that specific internal stitch 3 times with industrial-grade silk thread to ensure it survived the high-intensity movement of the runway. Tonight, I did the exact opposite. With 2 swift, silent, practiced strokes of the hidden blade, I cleanly severed the industrial silk anchoring thread. I left only a single fragile loop of thin, unknotted white cotton, holding the entire structural integrity of the blazer together. It looked completely flawless while she stood perfectly still in front of the mirror. But the exact moment the wearer extended her arm or twisted her torso, the internal physics of the garment would catastrophically fail. 5 minutes to final lineup! All models to the staging wings, the stage manager bellowed through a megaphone. I stood up, smoothing down the front lapel of Kiki's jacket with a look of pure, unbothered devotion. Go out there and give Dominic exactly the show he deserves, Kiki. As Kiki walked toward the staging line, I turned around and caught sight of Sasha standing by the primary accessory rack. She wasn't looking at the models. She was staring at Dominic through a gap in the velvet curtains, her fingers lightly tracing the Harry Winston diamond pendant resting on her collarbone. A moment later, Dominic slipped away from the reporters out front and stepped into the dim, shadowed corridor just behind the backstage curtain. He thought no one was watching. He caught Sasha's eye, a low, predatory grin spreading across his handsome face. He grabbed her by the wrist, not with the violence he had used on me in the future, but with a rough, burning familiarity, and pulled her behind a heavy rack of velvet evening gowns. I stepped silently into the shadows of the adjacent linen closet, the darkness enveloping me as I watched them. "You look breathtaking tonight," Dominic murmured, his voice a low, raspy growl as he pinned Sasha against the wall. His hands went straight to her waist, his fingers digging into the fabric of her skirt. "I can't stand seeing you stand back here while Maren takes up all the air in the room." Sasha let out a soft, breathy moan, her arms wrapping tightly around his neck as she pulled his mouth down to hers. They kissed with a frantic, desperate hunger, their lips parting with a wet, heavy intensity that made my stomach turn. Sasha's hands slid down his back, her nails clawing at his custom tuxedo jacket. "Then change it, Dominic," Sasha whispered against his lips, her eyes wild with a mixture of lust and dark ambition. "You promised me this would be the last collection she designs. You promised me I would be the one standing on the stage by your side." "Soon, baby, soon," Dominic groaned, burying his face in her neck, his lips biting at her skin until she gasped. "The lawyers are already setting up the patent structures. Once this launch clears and the stock value hits our target, we will phase her out completely. I'm tired of smelling her drafting graphite every time I kiss her. I want you." "Prove it," Sasha whispered, her hand sliding down the front of his trousers, her fingers moving with an intimate, practiced rhythm that made Dominic's breath catch sharply. "Tell me who owns you." "You do," Dominic choked out, his head tilting back against the wall as he surrendered to her touch. "You own me, Sasha. Just hold on a little longer. Let her do the heavy lifting for the Paris show, and then we drop her in the dirt." I stood, perfectly frozen in the dark, watching the rhythmic, desperate movements of their betrayal. My heart didn't break this time. The pain had already burned away in the future. Instead, a cold, calculated, diamond-hard malice settled deep into my bones. Every kiss they shared, every touch of their skin was just another receipt I was going to force them to pay in blood. "Dominic, you're back on in 2 minutes," the stage manager's voice called out from down the hall. Dominic pulled away from Sasha with a heavy, ragged sigh, smoothing down his tuxedo trousers and adjusting his bow tie. Sasha adjusted her unbuttoned blouse, her lips swollen, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered across her face as she watched him walk back out toward the lights. The lights inside the grand ballroom suddenly dimmed to a dramatic deep blue hue. The heavy, rhythmic bass of a custom electronic soundtrack began to thud through the massive subwoofers, vibrating the very floorboards beneath our feet. One by one, the models stepped out from behind the curtain, their faces frozen in cold, high-fashion expressions as they marched down the white runway. I walked slowly to the edge of the velvet curtains, standing right in the wings where I could see both the runway and the VIP tables. Sasha immediately crowded in next to me, her eyes glued to her digital tablet as she monitored the live social media feeds, her breath still coming slightly fast from her tryst in the shadows. "The online engagement data is already climbing through the roof, Sasha." Sasha's tone carried a fake, professional sweetness that made me want to smile. "The Albright brand name is trending #1 globally right now. Dominic is going to absolutely dominate the morning papers." "Keep your eyes on the runway, Sasha," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any warmth. "The show isn't over until the final model turns." Kiki stepped out from behind the curtain, closing the show.
The moment her boots hit the white runway, the crowd immediately leaned forward, the sudden, aggressive flashbulbs of 100 professional photographers creating a blinding, continuous wall of white light. The charcoal blazer looked magnificent under the high-intensity studio lighting, its sharp lines casting dramatic shadows across her frame. At the head table, Eleanor Albright offered a rare, stiff nod of matriarchal approval, while Dominic stood up completely from his seat, raising his champagne glass directly toward the cameras in a gesture of preemptive victory. Then came the exact dramatic moment that Dominic had personally choreographed during the afternoon rehearsal. He had instructed Kiki to stop at the absolute edge of the runway, turn her body directly toward the front row press corps, and raise her left arm in a bold, dramatic, high-fashion salute to emphasize the geometric line of the sleeve. Kiki reached the end of the white platform. She paused, striking a powerful stance. She turned her face directly toward the wall of lenses, and with an elegant, sweeping motion, she raised her left arm high above her head. Snap! Deep within the fabric, the single, fragile loop of loose white cotton unraveled instantly under the sudden physical tension. Without that critical internal anchoring point to balance the radical weight, the heavy, unlined charcoal wool drape across her right shoulder lost its physics. Right before the eyes of the entire fashion world, the entire right side of the blazer slid violently and messily down Kiki's torso. The heavy fabric bunched into an awkward, misshapen, crumpled pile around her waist, completely exposing her bare, nude-colored structural undergarment and the messy, white, unlined inner foam padding of the jacket's interior construction. The electronic music continued to thud loudly through the speakers, but the entire grand ballroom went completely, horrifyingly dead silent. Then, a split second later, the frantic, chaotic clicking of the paparazzi cameras exploded tenfold. The blinding white flashes illuminated every inch of Kiki's face as her confident expression instantly twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror and public humiliation. She gasped, frantically trying to pull the heavy, collapsed fabric back up over her shoulder. But without the internal anchor, the blazer was nothing more than a misshapen, ruined sack of wool. Panic took over. She turned on her heel and practically sprinted back down the runway toward the backstage wings, clutching the ruined fabric to her chest as tears of embarrassment streamed down her face. Backstage instantly erupted into a screaming, frantic panic. "What happened? What just happened?" the stage manager shrieked, tearing at his headset. "The centerpiece garment just literally disintegrated live on the global stream." The heavy velvet curtains were violently ripped aside 2 seconds later. Dominic Albright burst into the backstage area. His handsome face was a deep, terrifying shade of purple, his veins bulging against his neck, his pristine tuxedo collar slightly askew from his frantic movement. He marched directly through the crowd of scattering models, his eyes locked onto me like an enraged predator. "Maren!" he roared, his voice shaking with a mixture of corporate terror and absolute fury. "What the hell was that? Our primary centerpiece garment just fell completely apart in front of the chief editor of Vogue and our biggest European investors. How could your team possibly miss a structural defect that massive?" I didn't flinch. I didn't take a single step back. I stood my ground perfectly, my face instantly morphing into a masterfully crafted mask of calm, deeply distressed innocence. I looked slightly past his shoulder, noticing that Sasha had pushed through the crowd, her eyes wide as she stared at me with a sudden, sharp layer of intense suspicion. "I don't understand how this could happen either, Dominic," I said, my voice raised just enough so that the entire backstage crew, the frantic sample makers, and the surrounding models could hear every single word clearly over the lingering noise. I followed the exact geometric sketches that you personally brought to my design desk last week. You explicitly insisted on that radical high-angle shoulder drape without the traditional internal canvas lining support. I told you repeatedly during our private design session that removing that structural lining would leave the fabric completely unstable under movement, but you shouted me down. You told me the Albright legacy didn't need to be bound by traditional design constraints. You told me it was your personal genius breakthrough. I simply executed your vision exactly as you commanded. Dominic's jaw dropped. His eyes darted frantically around the room, suddenly realizing that a dozen independent sample makers, professional tailors, and rival brand scouts were staring directly at him, absorbing every syllable of my statement. In his desperate, arrogant rush to claim sole credit for the design to the press out on the floor, he had publicly signed his name to the entire structural concept. He couldn't claim I was incompetent without openly admitting to the fashion elite that he had lied about being the creative force behind the collection. He was completely trapped by his own vanity. "You," Dominic hissed, stepping directly into my personal space, his breath hot against my face as his voice dropped to a low, dangerous, venomous growl that only I could hear. "You did this on purpose. You sabotaged the line." "I did exactly what my CEO commanded me to do, Dominic," I whispered back, my calm, steady eyes flashing with a cold, terrifying, predatory fire that caused him to instinctively take a half-step back in shock. "If you want to be the actual heart and mind of a fashion house, Dominic, you have to actually learn how to sew. Otherwise, you're just an empty suit." I turned my back on him without waiting for a response, walking straight over to my personal equipment rack. I picked up my heavy, dark leather pattern book, the book containing generations of proprietary textile formulas, pattern measurements, and independent designs, and tucked it firmly under my arm. I looked at Sasha one final time, her face pale, as she realized the storm that was about to hit the company. "Sasha, pack the rest of my drafting tools. I am leaving the premises." "Maren, wait." Sasha took a frantic step forward, her professional innocence completely shattering. "Where are you going? The autumn production line is supposed to cut tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. "The Albright production line has no fabric, Sasha," I said. A beautiful, razor-sharp smile cut across my face as I thought about the massive city water main that would burst into their midtown basement in less than 6 hours. "Sasha, go tell Eleanor that if she wants her lead designer back, she'll have to come find me in the one place that her family's money can't buy." I turned and walked out of the Plaza Hotel's backstage exit, my high heels clicking with absolute authority against the polished marble floors, leaving behind the chaotic, shattering remains of the Albright family's perfect dynasty. As I stepped out into the crisp, cool New York night air, I pulled a deep, clean breath into my chest. For the first time in 2 entire lifetimes, I felt completely, beautifully free. I raised my hand and hailed a passing yellow cab, my eyes fixed firmly on the dark, massive steel span of the Manhattan Bridge rising up in the distance. The battle on Fifth Avenue was over. It was time to go across the river. It was time to see my brother Gideon. It was time to build my army. The yellow cab rattled violently as it crossed the metal expansion joints of the Manhattan Bridge.
the tires singing a low-hummed lullaby against the steel grid. Outside the window, the East River stretched out like a massive sheet of black, crumpled satin, reflecting the fractured silver needles of the city skyline. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, the leather pattern book clutched so tightly against my ribs that the sharp corners dug through the silk of my dress. When the cab finally drifted down into the industrial shadows of Dumbo, the luxury of Fifth Avenue felt like a dream from someone else's life. The driver pulled to a stop in front of an ancient 6-story red brick warehouse. The faded white paint on the masonry still bore the ghost of a century-old logo, Vanguard Industrial Textiles. This was where my family story had actually started, long before the Albrights built their glass and marble shrines to vanity on Fifth Avenue. My grandfather had immigrated to this city with nothing but a pair of heavy tailor shears and an obsession with construction. While the Albrights specialized in the illusion of glamour, my older brother, Gideon, ran the actual unglamorous mechanics of the trade. He knew the fabric mills in North Carolina, the shipping routes out of the port of Newark, the local labor unions, and the independent sample makers who actually did the heavy lifting. I pushed open the heavy, reinforced iron entrance doors. Instantly, the familiar, comforting sensory assault washed over me. The rhythmic, mechanical thud-thud-thud of industrial cutting machines, the faint, oily scent of sewing machine lubricant, the sharp tang of raw, unwashed wool, and the humid warmth of heavy commercial steam presses. Maren? Gideon stepped out from a brightly lit office alcove in the back. He was a massive man, built more like a steel worker than a fashion executive, wearing a heavy canvas work apron over a faded flannel shirt. He was wiping dark machine grease from his thick hands onto a tattered shop rag. He stopped dead in his tracks, his dark eyes sweeping over me, taking in my rumpled evening dress, my smudged makeup, the fierce, manic light burning in my eyes, and the split skin on my fingertips I was trying to hide. "What the hell are you doing here?" Gideon's deep voice vibrated through the floorboards. "It's past midnight. Aren't you supposed to be at the plaza, celebrating your grand debut with the Albright royalty? I thought tonight was the night you officially became a partner."
"The debut is over, Gideon," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was flat, cold, and heavy, carrying the weight of a woman who had already died once. "And my relationship with Dominic Albright is permanently dead." Gideon's expression hardened in a fraction of a second. The shop rag dropped to the floor. He stepped forward, his massive frame instantly casting a protective shadow over me. "What did he do to you, Maren? If that trust fund bastard laid a hand on you." "He tried to steal my soul, Gideon," I interrupted, walking past him to slam my leather pattern book down onto the massive oak layout table in the center of the room. The heavy thud echoed through the rafters. "He and Sasha systematically stripped my name from every single design patent we filed over the last 18 months. They registered the Autumn line under Sasha's name. They planned to announce me as a simple pattern maker, push me out of the company, and use my work to inflate their public stack value. And while I was working 18-hour days to feed his empire, he was sleeping with her, right in his office, behind my back." Gideon let out a low animal growl, his fists clenching so hard his forearms' veins strained against his skin. "I knew we shouldn't have trusted them. I told you their money was toxic. We go to the lawyers first thing in the morning. We sue them into the dirt." "No," I said, a cold, sharp laugh escaping my lips as I leaned over the table, opening the book to a blueprint of our family's proprietary textile weave formulas. "The legal system takes months, and the Albrights have a fortress of corporate attorneys who can tie us up in discovery until we starve. We don't fight them in a courtroom, Gideon. We fight them in the market. We destroy their ability to produce." Gideon frowned, walking over to the opposite side of the table. "What are you talking about? They have the capital. They have the factory contracts." "Not for long," I whispered.
looking up at him with absolute certainty. Tomorrow morning, at exactly 5:30 a.m., the ancient, unmapped water main directly beneath the street outside the Albright Midtown cutting facility is going to suffer a catastrophic rupture. The entire basement storage unit will fill with 3 feet of filthy sewage water within an hour. Gideon stared at me as if I had lost my mind. A water main break? Maren, how could you possibly know that? Are you planning a sabotage? I don't need to plan it. It's already written, I said, unable to explain the time jump without sounding insane. Just trust me, it is going to happen. And because I had Sasha file a customs hold at JFK Airport this afternoon, our entire container of premium Italian silk and satin from the Como mills is perfectly safe, dry, and locked inside a federal warehouse under my private designer identification code. Dominic has absolutely no premium fabric backup stock in Manhattan, none. Gideon's eyes widened as the logistical geometry of the trap began to click into place within his analytical mind. He leaned his heavy palms on the table, a slow, dangerous smile creeping across his face. If their midtown stock is destroyed and the Italian silk is locked up, they can't fulfill their autumn orders for the major luxury department stores. They'll miss the hard retail shipping deadlines. Exactly, I said, my voice hardening. If they miss those deadlines, they face millions of dollars in automatic contract penalties, and their corporate investors will panic, causing their stock price to crater. But we aren't done yet. We need to completely suffocate them. What's the play? Gideon asked, the excitement of the hunt finally bleeding into his voice. We use every dollar of liquid capital Vanguard Textiles has. We call every independent wool mill in Pennsylvania, every premium linen supplier in New Jersey, and every local textile distributor on the East Coast. We buy up their entire remaining raw inventory before the sun comes up. We offer them cash up front, 5% above market value, and we secure exclusive distribution rights for the next 60 days. By the time Dominic realizes his basement is a swamp, he won't even be able to purchase a single spool of high-grade thread in the tri-state area without walking through our front door. Gideon looked at the leather pattern book, then looked back up at me, his eyes burning with an intense, fierce pride. He reached out and placed his massive hand over mine. We've been suppliers for 30 years, Maren. It's about time we became the kings. Let's wake up the network. For the next 5 hours, the Vanguard warehouse became a war room. While the rest of the city slept, the phones rang continuously. Gideon worked the logistics lines, his deep voice commanding the respect of old-school textile mill owners who had known our family for decades. I sat at the computer terminals routing payments, signing independent supply exclusivity contracts, and organizing logistics. By 4:30 a.m., we had successfully monopolized every yard of luxury-grade apparel fabric within a 300-mile radius. At exactly 5:45 a.m., my phone vibrated on the desk. It was an automated local news alert for the Midtown Manhattan district. Massive water main break floods corporate commercial basements on 38th Street. Transit lines disrupted. I held the phone up to Gideon. He looked at the headline, let out a booming laugh that shook the glass windows of the office, and handed me a steaming mug of black coffee. "The board is set, little sister," he smiled, his teeth flashing in the dim light. "Let's see how long the prince can survive without his clothes." The morning sun had barely cleared the glass spires of Midtown Manhattan when Dominic Albright's world began to rot. Inside the sleek marble-paneled executive suite on the top floor of the Fifth Avenue flagship, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of unwashed panic. Dominic was pacing the length of the room like a caged animal,
his bespoke tuxedo trousers from the night before replaced by a rumpled, unbuttoned white shirt, his hair wild and completely disheveled. Standing near the window, clutching her digital tablet like a shield, was Sasha. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wide with terror, her emerald satin dress replaced by a quickly thrown-together corporate outfit. "What do you mean it's gone?" Dominic roared, slamming his fist onto his mahogany desk so hard his crystal paperweight rattled. "Every single yard of the premium reserve satin? The entire charcoal wool shipment for the autumn line? How does a basement flood destroy an entire seasonal launch?" "Dominic, the water main rupture was directly outside our primary cutting house. The sewage water didn't just wet the bolts, the chemical contamination completely dissolved the organic dye sets. $3 million of raw material is a complete write-off. It's a total loss." Dominic spun around, his face twisted into a pure, unadulterated venom. "The backup stock from Italy, the shipment Maren cleared from the Como mills last week. Tell me the trucks are arriving at the secondary warehouse." Sasha swallowed hard, taking a defensive step back toward the glass window. That's the problem, Dominic. The Italian shipment never arrived at the cutting house. I tracked the shipping manifestation through the portal. Maren had me file an extended manual customs hold at JFK yesterday afternoon. She filed the legal paperwork using her private independent designer identification code. The federal warehouse won't release those containers to our corporate logistics team without her physical signature or an explicit court order. "That conniving, manipulative little bitch," Dominic spat, his chest heaving as he realized how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered. He stormed over to Sasha, grabbing her roughly by her upper arms, his fingers digging deep into her skin until she let out a sharp gasp of pain. "You filed the paperwork, Sasha. You were supposed to be monitoring her every move. How did you let her slip a sovereign customs hold past you?" She threatened me, Dominic," Sasha cried out, tears of panic spilling over her eyelashes as she looked up into his enraged face. "She knew about the collection structure. She looked at me yesterday like she could see right through my skin. I thought if I refused her order, she would go straight to Eleanor before the plaza show and ruin our entire plan." Dominic released her with a violent shove, muttering a string of curses as he tore at his collar. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany double doors of the executive suite swung open with a slow, deliberate, terrifying authority. Eleanor Albright walked into the room. She was the absolute matriarch of the dynasty, a woman whose heart was rumored to be carved from solid New England ice. She was dressed in an immaculate, razor-sharp gray tweed Chanel suit, her silver hair pulled back into a flawless, aerodynamic chignon. She didn't look at Sasha. She didn't look at Dominic. She walked directly to the center of the room, her leather-gloved hands resting gracefully on the silver handle of her walking cane. "Sit down, Dominic," Eleanor said. Her voice didn't rise above a calm conversational tone, but it carried a sub-zero chill that instantly silenced the room. Dominic swallowed his rage, his posture instantly collapsing into that of an insecure boy as he sank into his leather executive chair. "Mother, the flood was an unpreventable logistical anomaly." "I am not referring to the water main, you foolish boy," Eleanor interrupted, her cold, diamond-sharp eyes fixing onto his face. "I am referring to the global social media metrics from last night's Plaza Gala. The video of Kiki's structural garment collapse has been viewed over 45 million times in the last 12 hours. The international fashion press is calling the Albright brands an empty, talentless house built on cheap, unlined parlor tricks. Our public stock opened this morning at a staggering 12% deficit, and the board of directors is already calling for an extraordinary emergency session.
Sasha tried to slip quietly toward the side exit, her head bowed, but Eleanor's cane snapped down against the hardwood floor with a sharp, echoing crack. "And who is this creature?" Eleanor asked, her eyes slowly raking down Sasha's frame with a look of visceral disgust. "I'm Sasha, Madam Albright," Sasha whispered, her voice practically cracking with terror as she clutched her tablet. "I'm Maren's personal assistant and the newly registered head designer for the autumn luxury collection." Eleanor let out a short, dry, mocking laugh that cut through the air like a razor blade. "Head designer, you? Girl, I have spent 50 years evaluating the elite creative minds of Europe and America. I know the distinct metallic scent of high-stakes corporate ambition, and I know the scent of a cheap, low-wage sewing girl trying to climb her way into a bed that doesn't belong to her. You did not design that asymmetrical blazer. Maren did." Dominic stepped in frantically, his hands sweating. "Mother, the legal transfers are completely airtight. Sasha owns the patents now. We can use her to—" "Sasha cannot sew a straight hemline to save her miserable life, Dominic," Dominic snapped, her voice finally cracking like winter ice. "The European distributors from Neiman Marcus and Harrods just issued a joint ultimatum. They do not care about your legal transfers or your boardroom arrangements. They want the authentic, premium structural garments that Maren promised them, or they are canceling their entire multi-million-dollar seasonal purchase orders by 5 o'clock this afternoon. If those orders are canceled, our credit lines will collapse. The Albright dynasty will be completely bankrupt before the weekend." Dominic's face went entirely pale, the reality of absolute financial ruin hitting him like a physical blow. "What do we do?" "You are going to find Maren," Eleanor commanded, her eyes drilling into his soul. "You are going to get down on your knees. You are going to swallow whatever pathetic little pride you think you possess, and you are going to buy her back at whatever price she demands. If she wants your title, you will give it to her. If she wants this flagship building, you will sign the deed. Because if you do not bring her back to this design suite by 3 o'clock today, I will personally strip you of your inheritance, evict you from the family estate, and leave you to starve in the gutter with your assistant." Without another word, Eleanor turned on her heel and strode out of the office, her security detail closing the heavy doors behind her with a definitive, thunderous echo. The room went dead silent. Dominic stared at the mahogany desk, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Sasha took a tentative step toward him, her hand reaching out to touch his trembling shoulder. "Dominic, baby, it's going to be okay. We can find another supplier. We can find a factory in Queens that can run cheap synthetics." "Shut up," Dominic screamed, violently swinging his arm backward to track across the desk, sending his laptops, his crystal paperweights, and his expensive designer pens crashing to the floor. "Get away from me, Sasha. It was your greed that pushed me to accelerate the patent transfer. If I lose my inheritance because of your pathetic, low-rent ambitions, I will make sure you never find a job cleaning floors in this city again." Sasha recoiled as if she had been struck, her face twisting into a mask of pure, bitter venom. The illusion of their passionate, high-stakes romance was disintegrating, revealing the cold, ugly rot of mutual survival underneath. "My greed?" Sasha hissed, her voice dropping to a vicious, venomous register as her fears transformed into pure malice. You were the one who couldn't keep your hands out of my skirt, Dominic. You were the one who promised me the world while you used my name to hide your family's systemic tax frauds. Don't you dare try to throw me to the wolves now. We are in this hell together. Dominic didn't look at her. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers shaking so violently he almost dropped it as he opened his contacts. He dialed Maren's private number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then it went straight to a cold, automated voicemail. Across the East River, inside the humming, cavernous belly of the Vanguard Industrial Textiles warehouse, I sat at the central oak layout table, a crystal glass of ice water in my hand. Beside me, the warehouse computer monitors were displaying the live tumbling stock ticker for Albright Global Luxury. The red line was in a near vertical free fall, shedding hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization with every tick of the clock. Gideon walked up to the table, a heavy wireless headset clamped over his ear, a wide, triumphant grin stretching across his rugged face. He hit the button to end a call and dropped the headset onto the table. That was the director of the North Carolina Wool Cooperative, Gideon said, leaning his heavy forearms on the oak surface. Dominic's purchasing agents have been frantically calling every single textile supplier from Maine to Georgia for the last 2 hours. They offered double the market value for any raw charcoal wool or luxury silk weave inventory available for immediate hotshot delivery. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water, the ice clinking softly against the glass. And what did the cooperative tell them? They told them the truth, Gideon chuckled, a deep rumbling sound of absolute satisfaction. They told them that every single yard of premium apparel fabric on the eastern seaboard has already been legally secured under an exclusive 30-day distribution embargo by Vanguard Industrial Textiles. If Dominic wants to buy so much as a single square inch of luxury wool to salvage his collection, he has to come directly to us. Right on cue, the high-end smartphone sitting on the table before me began to vibrate aggressively. The digital screen illuminated with a crisp, clear image of Dominic's face, a photo taken during our engagement vacation in Capri, back when I was still blind enough to believe his smile was real. I let it vibrate for 5 full seconds, watching the screen cycle through the call before I calmly slid my finger across the glass to answer. I placed the phone on speaker. "Maren, thank God," Dominic's voice erupted from the speaker, completely stripped of his usual aristocratic arrogance. He sounded breathless, frantic, and desperate. "Maren, please don't hang up. We need to talk immediately. There's been a massive, catastrophic misunderstanding regarding the Plaza show and the patent filings." "There is no misunderstanding, Dominic," I said softly, my voice completely flat, carrying the calm, absolute authority of an executioner. "You and Sasha took my life's work, stripped my name from the legal registry, and locked me out of the building. You chose your path. Now you get to walk it." "Maren, please listen to me," Dominic pleaded, his voice cracking slightly over the line. "The board is panicking. The European orders are going to be canceled by 5 o'clock. My mother is threatening to completely destroy my life. I know about the customs hold at JFK, Maren. I know you control the silk shipment. And my agents just informed me that Vanguard has locked up the raw wool market. Please, let's fix this. We can restructure the entire partnership. I will give you 50% of the corporate equity. We can get married next month, just like we planned.
I'll fire Sasha immediately. I'll throw her out on the street today, Maren. Just name your price. I looked up at Gideon, who was watching me with a look of intense, quiet solidarity. I reached out, my fingers lightly tracing the worn leather cover of our grandfather's pattern book. My price, Dominic, is very simple, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, diamond-hard whisper. I want a full, legally binding corporate dissolution of Albright Luxury. I want 90% of the global brand assets, the complete physical deed to the Fifth Avenue flagship building, and a public signed confession of patent theft and corporate fraud published on the front page of the New York Times. Are you insane? Dominic gasped, his voice instantly twisting into a screech of pure corporate panic. That would completely destroy my family's legacy. There would be nothing left for me. Then I suggest you go find a pair of scissors and learn how to make a coat, Dominic, because at exactly 5.5 minutes past 3 o'clock, I am signing an exclusive contract with Neiman Marcus to launch my own independent luxury line, Maren Vanguard, using the exact Italian silk and charcoal designs you tried to steal from me. You have exactly 3 hours to bring the signed deeds and the confession to my brother's warehouse in Dumbo. If you are 1 minute late, the Albright dynasty dies today. Before he could utter another syllable of panic, I tapped the screen, cutting off the connection. I stood up from the oak table, smoothing down the front of my dress, the residual adrenaline of the time jump transforming into a calm, predatory clarity. The trap was set. The bait was taken. It was time to watch the prince crawl into the dark. The relentless heat of the July afternoon beat down on the industrial gravel of the Dumbo waterfront, baking the ancient bricks of the Vanguard warehouse until the air shimmered with heat haze. Inside, the massive vaulted workspace remained surprisingly cool, shielded by thick masonry and the hum of heavy industrial ceiling fans that sliced through the dusty shafts of golden sunlight. At exactly 2:45 p.m., a sleek, stretched black Mercedes limousine pulled up outside our loading docks. Its polished chrome wheels crunched loudly against the broken asphalt. The rear doors swung open, and Dominic Albright stepped out into the humid Brooklyn air. The transformation was staggering. The pristine, untouchable billionaire prince of Fifth Avenue looked utterly broken. His high-end designer shirt was damp with sweat. His tie was stuffed haphazardly into its pocket, and his eyes were bloodshot and wild with exhaustion. But he wasn't alone. Eleanor Albright stepped out behind him, her movements stiff, but radiating an icy, desperate dignity. And dragging behind them like a piece of discarded luggage was Sasha. Sasha's face was a ruin of running mascara and tear-stained skin. The emerald satin slip dress she had worn so triumphantly in the future and used to seduce Dominic in the dark corridors of the plaza was gone, replaced by a rumpled corporate skirt. The Harry Winston diamond pendant hung crookedly against her collarbone, a useless token of a romance that had turned into a suicide pact. The iron warehouse doors groaned as Gideon threw them open, his massive 6'4" frame casting a long, intimidating shadow over the approaching trio. He didn't speak. He simply stepped aside, gesturing toward the center of the warehouse floor with a cold, mocking flick of his chin. I stood waiting for them at the massive oak layout table, my hands resting lightly on the leather-bound pattern book. As they walked deeper into the facility, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of our industrial sewing machines suddenly ceased,
Dozens of highly skilled local sample makers and tailors, the very workers Dominic had consistently exploited and underpaid, turned in their seats, staring silently at the fallen royalty of Manhattan. Dominic marched up to the opposite side of the table, his chest heaving. He slammed a thick leather legal portfolio down onto the wood, his hands trembling so violently he could barely keep them flat. "It's all in here, Maren," Dominic hissed, his voice a desperate, raspy whisper that cracked under the weight of his humiliation. "The 90% equity transfer, the deed to the Fifth Avenue flagship building, the absolute surrender of the design patents, and the public confession, typed out, signed, and notarized by our corporate legal team. It's everything you asked for. Now give us the digital customs release keys for the JFK Silk. The department store buyers are on the phone right now." I didn't touch the portfolio. I slowly lifted my gaze, letting my eyes rake over Dominic's desperate face before shifting focus to Sasha, who was trembling behind his shoulder. "You look tired, Sasha," I said smoothly, my tone dripping with a terrifying, calm pity. "Where is that triumphant smile from the Plaza showroom? I thought you were the new creative genius of the Albright dynasty. I thought you were the one who was going to teach Dominic what a real woman feels like." Sasha flinched as if she had been struck with a whip, her eyes widening in absolute horror. How do you know about that? We never told you. We were so careful." Dominic snapped his head around, his face twisting into a mask of pure venomous betrayal as he glared at Sasha. "You told her, you stupid, loose-lipped bitch. You bragged to someone, didn't you? You ruined our leverage because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about what we did in the office." "I didn't say a word, Dominic. I swear to you," Sasha screamed hysterically through the rafters as she clawed at his arm. "She's a witch. She's been watching us from the beginning. She set us up." Enough. Eleanor Albright's voice cut through the warehouse like a sub-zero blade. She stepped forward, her silver walking cane snapping against the concrete floor with an echoing crack that instantly silenced the screaming lovers. She looked at me, her expression a mix of profound calculation and grim respect. "The romantic indiscretions of my son are irrelevant to the ledger, Maren. They are garbage to be swept away. The paperwork before you strips the Albright name from the luxury market forever. We have surrendered. Sign the customs release and let us salvage what remains of our personal capital." "Surrendered," I repeated, a slow, beautiful, terrifying smile spreading across my lips as I finally drew myself up to my full height. "You haven't surrendered yet, Eleanor. Because you still think this is a business negotiation. You still think this is about fabric and real estate." I walked slowly around the perimeter of the mahogany table, my high heels clicking with absolute lethal precision against the concrete floorboards. I stopped exactly 3 inches away from Dominic, the acrid sense of his panicked sweat hitting my nose. "You see, Dominic," I whispered, my voice dropping to a low hypnotic register that made the hairs on his arms stand up. "I know exactly what happens in the dark. I know about the late nights in the Midtown studio on the leather sofa. I know about the promises you made to her while I was bleeding over your patterns. And I know about the concrete archive vault in Queens." Dominic's breath caught sharply in his throat, his aristocratic face drained of every single drop of color, turning a sickening, translucent shade of gray. The Queen's vault? We haven't used that archive in 3 years. How do you—" "I know that by midnight tonight, you plan to have a tragic, catastrophic electrical fire catch in the basement directly below me," whispered, the pure, unfiltered memory of my past death burning in the back of my eyelids. "I know how fast silk burns, Dominic. I know how the smoke tastes when it fills your lungs while the person you loved walks away into the dark, holding someone else's hand." "Maren, "You're insane," Dominic stammered, his knees buckling slightly as he took a frantic step backward, staring at me as if he were looking at a literal ghost. We haven't done that. We haven't even talked about the vault." "But you would have," I said, my voice hardening into an unyielding, diamond-sharp declaration of war. "The universe just decided to let me unpick your seams before you ever got the chance to light the match." I turned my back on his panic, walking straight over to the laptop terminal sitting on the edge of the layout table. I tapped a single green icon on the screen. "The customs release keys for the Italian silk have just been permanently deleted from the federal system, Eleanor," I announced, looking back at the silver-haired matriarch. "The container is being routed to my independent brand warehouse under a federal asset seizure loop. The shipping deadlines for Harrods and Neiman Marcus have officially passed. It is 5.5 minutes past 3 o'clock. "No!" Dominic let out a primal, strangled scream of pure financial agony, dropping to his knees on the concrete floor as his phone began to vibrate continuously with hundreds of automated corporate margin call alerts. Eleanor closed her eyes, her regal shoulders sagging for the first time in her life as she realized the absolute finality of the execution. The Albright stock ticker on our screens plummeted into absolute zero. Sasha dropped to her knees beside Dominic, frantically grabbing at his damp shirt, her voice a sobbing, pathetic mess of broken ambition. Dominic, look at me. We can still go to Europe. You still have your personal offshore accounts. Tell me we still have the penthouse." Dominic didn't look at her. With a sudden violent surge of pure self-loathing and rage, he shoved her away from him, sending her crashing onto the dirty concrete floorboards. "Get away from me, you parasitic trash. I lost everything because I let you into my bed. You're nothing but a low-wage seamstress, and you ruined my life." Sasha scrambled back up, her face twisting into a mask of feral, unhinged fury. She lunged forward, her long manicured nails clawing viciously at his eyes, drawing thin, bright lines of crimson down his aristocratic cheeks. "You coward! You pathetic, weak-willed trust fund boy! You used me! You tasted me because your fiancé was too pure for your filthy, corrupted soul, and now you want to throw me in the gutter?" They collapsed into a messy, screaming, pathetic heap on the floor, clawing and tearing at each other's clothes and skin, a grotesque public burial of a romance that had been built entirely on a foundation of theft and vanity. Gideon stepped forward, his massive hands grabbing Dominic and Sasha by their collars, effortlessly lifting the screaming, fighting ex-lovers off the floor and dragging them toward the loading dock exit like two bags of industrial waste. He threw them out into the blinding, dusty heat of the Brooklyn street, slamming the heavy iron door shut behind them with a definitive, deafening boom that shook the very foundation of the building. The warehouse went completely, beautifully silent. I turned back to the oak table, picking up my grandfather's leather pattern book and tucking it firmly under my arm. I pulled a deep, clean, glorious breath of clean air into my chest, air that was entirely free of smoke, free of ash, and completely free of their toxic betrayal. I walked toward the grand floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out past the Manhattan Bridge toward the distant sparkling spires of Fifth Avenue. The old dynasty was gone, burned to the ground by the fire of their own arrogance. And from the unyielding, solid foundation of the ashes, I had finally built my apex.